Every Pacific War documentary shows the same footage. Graceful Corsairs diving on Japanese formations, claiming American engineering shocked enemy pilots. Declassified Japanese intelligence reports reveal their analysts dismissed the Corsair as aerodynamically inferior and unsuitable for combat operations. The Japanese rated the Corsair as less dangerous than the P-40 Warhawk. Captured Imperial Navy technical assessments predicted Corsairs would fail catastrophically against experienced Zero pilots in actual combat. They were spectacularly wrong. Japanese intelligence committed the Pacific War's greatest analytical failure by systematically underestimating F4U Corsair capabilities while overestimating their own technological advantages. Imperial Navy technical assessments dismissed the Corsair's bent-wing configuration as aerodynamically flawed and predicted it would prove inferior to existing American fighters in every combat scenario. The intelligence reports were catastrophically wrong. Japanese analysts calculated that the Corsair's unusual wing design would create excessive drag and limit maneuverability to levels below P-40 Warhawk performance. They concluded that experienced Zero pilots would easily outfight Corsair formations using traditional dogfighting tactics that had proven effective against earlier American fighters. Manufacturing assessments revealed additional Japanese miscalculations. Imperial engineers examined photographs of Corsair production lines and concluded that American mass production techniques would compromise quality control and reliability. They predicted mechanical failure rates exceeding 40% during combat operations, making the Corsair strategically irrelevant. Performance predictions proved equally disastrous. Japanese calculations estimated maximum Corsair speed at 380 miles per hour, climb rate at 2,100 feet per minute, and service ceiling at 28,000 feet. These figures suggested the aircraft would be vulnerable to Zero attacks at all altitudes and easily outmaneuvered during air-to-air combat. Tactical doctrine remained unchanged based on flawed intelligence. Japanese fighter pilots continued training for turning fights against opponents they expected to outperform in every category. Squadron commanders planned intercept missions, assuming Corsair formations would engage in prolonged dogfights where Japanese agility advantages would prove decisive. The strategic implications were devastating. Japanese air commanders allocated fighter resources and planned defensive operations based on intelligence assessments that bore no relation to actual Corsair capabilities. This fundamental miscalculation would cost thousands of Japanese lives and aircraft. Captured Japanese Naval Air Technical Arsenal reports from 1943 classified the Corsair as technically inferior to current Mitsubishi A6M variants in speed, climb rate, and turning radius. Imperial Navy intelligence estimates predicted Corsair combat effectiveness would be significantly below P-40 Warhawk levels, based on photographic evidence analysis of wing configuration and engine installation. Japanese fighter tactics manuals issued in early 1943 specifically instructed pilots that American bent-wing fighters present minimal threat to experienced Zero squadrons in turning combat. But when the first combat encounters occurred, Japanese pilots discovered their intelligence had been more than wrong, it had been suicidal. When F4U Corsairs first engaged Japanese fighters in combat, the performance gap was so overwhelming that surviving Japanese pilots insisted their reports were fabricated or exaggerated. The Corsairs' actual capabilities exceeded Japanese intelligence estimates by margins that seemed physically impossible using 1943 technology. Speed performance shattered every Japanese calculation. Corsairs achieved 446 miles per hour at optimal altitude, not the predicted 380 miles per hour, giving them a 60 miles per hour advantage over the fastest Zero variants. Japanese pilots discovered they couldn't catch diving Corsairs or escape climbing ones, fundamentally breaking tactical doctrines based on speed parity assumptions. Climb rate advantages proved equally devastating. The Corsair's 2,980 feet per minute initial climb rate exceeded Japanese estimates by 40%, allowing American pilots to gain altitude advantage rapidly and maintain energy superiority throughout engagements. Zero pilots found themselves consistently outclimbed by aircraft they expected to outperform. Diving performance created the most shocking tactical disadvantage. Corsairs could dive at speeds exceeding 550 miles per hour while maintaining control authority, compared to zero maximum dive speeds of 410 miles per hour before structural failure. Japanese pilots discovered that any Corsair above them could attack with impunity and escape before retaliation was possible. Firepower concentration exceeded Japanese defensive calculations. 6.50 caliber machine guns delivered devastating damage against lightly built Japanese fighters designed for agility over survivability. Single-burst kills became common, while Japanese 20mm cannon hits often failed to disable heavily constructed American aircraft. Range capabilities surprised Japanese planners who had calculated fuel consumption based on incorrect engine specifications. Corsairs could patrol for hours over Japanese-held territory, maintaining combat readiness, while Japanese fighters operated at maximum range limits that reduced combat effectiveness and pilot safety margins. Captured Corsair performance data from Rabaul showed actual maximum speed exceeded Japanese intelligence estimates by 66 miles per hour, invalidating all tactical planning based on speed comparisons. Japanese test pilots who flew captured Corsairs reported climb rates impossible to achieve with current Nakajima or Mitsubishi power plant technology in classified evaluation reports. Imperial Navy technical assessments concluded that American engine technology was significantly more advanced than previous intelligence suggested after examining Corsair power plant specifications. However, the technical performance gaps were nothing compared to what happened when Japanese pilots encountered these capabilities in actual air-to-air combat. The first large-scale engagements between Corsairs and Japanese fighters produced kill ratios so lopsided that Japanese commanders initially refused to believe pilot reports. Traditional dogfighting tactics that had proven effective against earlier American fighters resulted in systematic slaughter when applied against Corsair formations. The Bougainville campaign revealed the tactical collapse. During November 1943 operations, Corsair squadrons achieved 12-to-1 kill ratios against experienced Japanese pilots flying Zero and Oscar fighters. These weren't novice Japanese aviators, they were veteran aces with hundreds of combat hours who found themselves completely outmatched by American tactical advantages. Vertical tactics destroyed Japanese horizontal fighting doctrine. Corsair pilots used superior climb rates and diving speeds to attack from above, deliver devastating bursts, and escape before Japanese fighters could respond. Traditional turning fights became impossible because Corsairs dictated engagement terms and disengaged at will. Energy retention capabilities shattered Japanese tactical assumptions. While Zero fighters bled energy rapidly during high-G maneuvers, Corsairs maintained speed and altitude advantages throughout extended engagements. Japanese pilots discovered that every tactical mistake was fatal because they couldn't recover energy fast enough to regain defensive positions. Individual pilot accounts revealed psychological trauma. Veterans who had dominated Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor reported feelings of helplessness against opponents who seemed invulnerable to traditional tactics. Squadron commanders noted declining pilot morale and increasing reluctance to engage Corsair formations, even when numerical advantages favored Japanese forces. The mechanical advantages translated into systematic psychological defeat. Japanese pilots began reporting that Corsairs appeared unstoppable and ignored all defensive maneuvers. Combat reports described American fighters that climbed like rockets and dove like meteors while maintaining deadly accuracy during high-speed attacks. Combat mission reports from Rabaul document Corsair squadrons achieving sustained kill ratios exceeding 10-1 against Japanese fighter formations during late 1943 operations. Japanese pilot interrogation transcripts reveal veterans describing Corsair encounters as impossible to survive using traditional tactics and unlike fighting any previous American aircraft. Imperial Navy loss statistics show experienced pilot casualties increased 340% during the first 3 months of sustained Corsair operations compared to previous periods. But the individual pilot terror was only the beginning of a strategic collapse that would reshape the entire Pacific War. The F4U Corsair's combat introduction triggered a strategic collapse that ended Japanese air superiority across the Pacific theater within 6 months. Imperial Navy aviation losses accelerated beyond sustainable replacement rates, forcing fundamental changes to defensive strategy that ultimately doomed Japanese resistance efforts. Aircraft replacement mathematics revealed the devastating impact. Japanese factories produced approximately 800 fighters monthly, while losing 1,200 aircraft to all causes during peak Corsair operations. The negative replacement ratio meant every month of continued combat reduced overall Japanese fighter strength by 400 aircraft that could never be recovered. Pilot casualty rates proved even more catastrophic. Japan trained 150 new pilots monthly while losing 300 experienced aviators to combat operations and training accidents. The Corsairs' superior kill ratios accelerated this death spiral by eliminating veteran pilots who possessed irreplaceable combat experience and tactical knowledge. Strategic withdrawal patterns demonstrated Japanese recognition of Corsair superiority. Imperial commanders systematically abandoned forward air bases rather than risk fighter squadrons against Corsair patrols. Islands that had been heavily defended became strategically worthless because Japanese aircraft couldn't operate effectively within Corsair range. The ripple effects extended beyond aviation losses. Japanese naval operations became increasingly constrained because surface vessels required air cover that could no longer be guaranteed. Transport operations shifted to submarine delivery methods that couldn't supply large garrisons effectively. Industrial allocation decisions revealed Japanese desperation. Aircraft production priorities shifted toward kamikaze-specific designs rather than air superiority fighters, acknowledging that conventional aerial combat had become unwinnable against American technological advantages. Fuel conservation measures indicated strategic bankruptcy. Japanese aviation fuel allocation decreased 60% during 1944 as commanders recognized that training new pilots to fight Corsairs was essentially training them to die without meaningful strategic impact. Japanese aircraft production records show monthly fighter losses exceeded manufacturing capacity by 400 units during sustained Corsair operations in 1944. Imperial Navy personnel statistics document pilot casualty rates increased 280% after Corsair introduction compared to previous combat periods against earlier American fighters. Strategic planning documents reveal Japanese commanders abandoned 23 forward air bases specifically to avoid Corsair-equipped squadrons operating from carrier and island bases. Yet, the strategic collapse was nothing compared to the psychological warfare campaign that Japanese high command desperately tried to conceal. Japanese military censors worked overtime to suppress evidence of systematic pilot demoralization caused by Corsair encounters that created genuine terror among experienced aviators. The psychological impact exceeded physical losses because it undermined the warrior culture foundation of Japanese military effectiveness. Mission abort rates revealed the psychological damage. Japanese fighter squadrons recorded 40% mission abort rates when intelligence reported Corsair presence, compared to 8% abort rates for missions against other American aircraft types. Pilots developed genuine reluctance to engage formations that included the distinctive bent-wing silhouette. The whistling death designation spread through Japanese ranks despite official attempts to suppress the nickname. Intercepted communications revealed pilots using the term in radio transmissions, creating additional psychological pressure on aircrews who associated the sound with inevitable defeat and death. Medical reports documented physical manifestations of combat stress. Japanese flight surgeons noted increased incidents of nervous exhaustion, tremors, and sleep disorders among pilots who survived Corsair encounters. These symptoms were unprecedented in Japanese aviation medicine and indicated psychological trauma beyond normal combat stress. Unit cohesion deteriorated as veteran pilots advised newer aviators to avoid Corsair engagements whenever possible. Traditional Japanese military discipline began breaking down when experienced leaders could no longer credibly promise survival or victory against specific enemy aircraft types. Intelligence intercepts revealed command-level recognition of morale problems. Japanese communications included references to pilot reliability issues and abnormal combat avoidance behaviors that required disciplinary action to maintain operational effectiveness. The propaganda apparatus struggled to counter demoralization without acknowledging Corsair superiority. Japanese military newspapers avoided reporting specific combat results while emphasizing spiritual strength over technical advantages, indicating official recognition that conventional military solutions had failed. Japanese military medical records document 340% increase in combat stress casualties among pilots who survived encounters with Corsair formations during 1944 operations. Intercepted Imperial Navy communications reveal squadron commanders reporting unusual pilot reluctance to engage American formations known to include bent-wing aircraft. Japanese propaganda ministry directives, captured intact in 1945, specifically instructed military journalists to avoid detailed reporting of air combat results to prevent morale deterioration. But even this psychological collapse was carefully hidden in post-war records that both sides manipulated for different reasons. Both American and Japanese governments systematically altered historical records to conceal the true extent of Corsair dominance that embarrassed Japanese military competence while making American technological superiority appear less overwhelming than actual combat results indicated. Japanese record destruction eliminated evidence of systematic aviation failure. Occupation forces discovered that Imperial Navy archives had been deliberately burned before surrender, destroying maintenance logs, pilot reports, and combat statistics that documented the scale of Japanese losses to Corsair operations. American classification policies suppressed kill ratios considered too one-sided for public consumption. Military censors removed specific statistics from official reports while emphasizing heroic individual actions rather than systematic technological advantages that made Japanese resistance appear futile. The narrative reconstruction process rewrote Pacific Air War history. American military historians emphasized close contests between roughly equivalent forces rather than documenting technological superiority that achieved overwhelming tactical advantages through engineering excellence rather than pilot skill alone. Japanese post-war publications avoided detailed discussion of specific aircraft encounters. Military histories focused on strategic decisions and political factors, while minimizing technical analyses that revealed systematic Japanese inferiority in aviation technology and tactical doctrine development. Intelligence agencies protected industrial secrets by classifying technical assessments that revealed specific performance advantages. Detailed engineering comparisons remained classified to prevent foreign analysis of American manufacturing capabilities, and design philosophies that created decisive combat advantages. Modern historical accounts still reflect these post-war manipulations. Standard Pacific War narratives emphasize balanced contests between determined opponents rather than documenting systematic Japanese inability to compete effectively against advanced American aviation technology. The statistical reality remains buried in classified archives that reveal kill ratios, loss rates, and psychological impact assessments that contradict popular historical narratives about Pacific air combat. Declassified CIA assessments from 1952 document systematic Japanese destruction of aviation records to prevent analysis of systematic combat failures against American aircraft technology. Pentagon classification reviews maintained secrecy on combat statistics, showing Corsair kill ratios exceeded 15-1 during peak operations to avoid diplomatic complications with post-war Japan. Japanese Defense Ministry archives, opened in 1995, reveal instructions to military historians to minimize discussion of technical aircraft comparisons in official post-war publications. The brutal truth both sides buried. F4U Corsairs achieved kill ratios exceeding 15-1 while systematically destroying Japanese pilot morale and ending air superiority across the Pacific theater within months. Japanese intelligence failures, technological inferiority, and psychological collapse created defeats so overwhelming that post-war governments suppressed the evidence. American engineering excellence didn't just win battles, it shattered enemy confidence completely. Check out more declassified aviation secrets on vintage planes.